Hi, everyone. So today we're doing an interview with Dr. Carlo Biasucci. So he's built a very successful practice in Northern Ontario, and currently he runs a company called Elite Practice. And Dr. Biasucci has a very interesting story that I think a lot of dentists should, hear, and a lot of dentists should kind of focus on some of the things he's been focusing on. So I'll let him tell the story, but essentially, due to an unfortunate accident, he had to, switch gears and really focus on working on the business rather than in the business. And he was quite successful doing that. So, Dr. Biasucci, I want to, wonder if you can maybe go into that story, because I really connected with it. I think it's something that a lot of dentists can learn from. Could you tell us a bit about, what happened? What happened that made you like sort of switch gears, and which ultimately led to you building a very successful practice?
Sure, yeah, and thanks, Nick. I'll tell you we always have those defining moments in our lives. If you look back over your life, there's always this like two or three things that you can really just put it right down to a moment that changed your thinking, changed your path. And so this as you're bringing up was one of those for me. I call it both a blessing and a curse. I mean, now it's the best thing that could have happened, but at the time it didn't seem like it. So go back 10 years now. I was I would say conventionally successful dentist, $2.5 million practice. We were, running, doing the best we could with the 7 chairs we had in a small town in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. And things were going well, but it was stressful. It was a lot of grinding. It was a lot of, typical small business, right? Where the owner is
We hear it all the time. Yeah, with
you're trying
dentists.
to wear all the hats and you're trying to do everything, yourself. And you've got a few key people, and you're just everyone's just by brute force making it happen. And then, through my wife and I were big divers, and we would go quarterly somewhere really nice. Loved Grand Cayman as a destination. And one trip we were there was December 2012. The first dive of the week of dives that we had scheduled. I took a decompression injury, and I didn't know it. It was subtle until it wasn't. And so I tried one more dive that day. Ended up back in our suite, and basically I stared at the wall for 3 hours, is what my wife says. And then following that, all kinds of issues. Like I couldn't feel the left side of my body for until I went into a decompression chamber for 9 hours, and then that precipitated all kinds of further treatments and such. Hyperbaric treatment for, I don't know, I probably did it for 6 weeks on and off. But it took me a while to recover. So, I'd say about 6 months to get back to dentistry. So when you have a really busy practice that really depends on you, and then you get kicked out of that in a hurry. Right now with COVID and all these things that are happening, people are maybe a little more attuned to disruption. But 10 years ago, things were just smooth.
You run like clockwork. Yeah, it was
Yeah, it was,
not a lot happened in dentistry. Yeah.
that's right. Early 30s, like, you're invincible still, and you could just kind of, 3 coffees and I'll take care of it kind of thing. And then you get this, sudden reality check on your mortality, and it forces you to come out of that and think, okay, what am I doing? Where am I? Where's my life going? Do I like this? First of all, is this something I want to work up to get back to? Where am I? So this big, this discussion that you're forced into makes you start to think about, okay, well, maybe this is not exactly what I wanted. And so when you start thinking about it, well, how do the best businesses out there have thousands of employees and I'm stressed out with 12? And what is that? How could we make this better? So I wouldn't really have originally the vision of growing the practice to the size that it grew to, but I wanted to make it better. I wanted to systemize it. I wanted to, I really went down and studied for the whole time I was off. I didn't just sit there and ponder life. I gave myself a very short pity party, and then I went to work, and I studied every mentor, read, I don't know how many books, probably 100 books during that time. What do we do differently as dentists that we ought not be doing when we look at the best companies out there? So I studied in depth Disney, Ritz-Carlton, and a handful of others like Cheesecake Factory and a few others that ring a bell that I can recall, that they really just made an impression on me as how did these business grow from small operation to big operation to worldwide operation, and manage it so well. And no, we can't do that exactly as a dental practice, but there are so many pieces that we can pull into that. And so when we started looking at the systems, the training, the leadership requirements that you can pull into a dental office, the net result of that is over the 3 years that followed. So I took that year was kind of a write-off for me, but I started putting pieces in place. The following year, in the 2 years that followed, we tripled the practice. So from 2.5 million, we tripled it to just over 7 million. And we grew to 40 team members, 9 dentists, 17 operatories. Big practice, but it was way easier to run and much smoother of an operation. And it basically just changed the game completely in terms of what was I doing personally, and again, allowed me to reset my life, reset of what did I want to do then. I mean, I at that time we were contemplating having kids. Now we in that time we had our first child. I started slowing down, changing my schedule, building the practice to support the life I wanted rather than it consuming my life. So previously it was just whatever the practice needed, I just gave the time because that was the most important thing. And then we needed to, when you realize that that's just not the point of life, that's not why I'm here, is to just work my brains out. We shifted the focus completely to supporting the lifestyle that we wanted.
Yeah, this actually, this leads perfectly into my next question, because one thing that I see with a lot of, like small businesses in general is they feel like, they're working so hard, pulling their hair out every day just to reach, a certain level, right? Of let's say average, right? And when I talk about growth, in their head, I realize like they believe that if you want to double your business, it's going to require more of your time. It's going to be even more stressful. A lot of them are under this sort of impression of, people who run bigger practices or bigger businesses than me, they probably never get to see their kids. They probably, are stressed out. They're working 20 hours a day. And for me, it seems really bizarre. It's like, no, they actually work less than you. Things run smoother. You don't build a business 3 times the size by working 3 times more. That's not how you'll ever get there. It's about making the business run smoother without you. And I think this is something that's sort of like more difficult for dentists to grasp, because it is a bit of a unique situation. As a dentist, you kind of have to be in that operatory every day for the practice to make money. So there isn't a lot of opportunity for them to just kind of sit back and necessarily run the business, or at least that's what they think. So I want to kind of hear your perspective. You went from, you basically tripled the practice, grew it to, 8 million a year or so. Were you working 3 times more? Like, what was your experience when you tripled the practice? Was it stressful, or, I'm going to let you kind of talk about like, what did it feel in that kind of a business compared to your original business?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things I did during those 3 years is I spent a lot of time around other business owners who I was seeking rooms where I was the dumbest person in the room by intention. I wanted to be around people who are running businesses in the 50 to $100 million range, so that I could see what these people are like. Are they superhuman? Do they have some special skill that I don't? And the funny thing is you learn the most at lunch with these folks. Like, just sitting there listening to their problems are the same problems that anybody else. They've got kids, they've got life to deal with, they've got all kinds of stuff. But what they have that dentists don't have is that the dentist is wearing 5 hats. And this person in their company is the CEO with a C-suite of executives below them. They have an executive team who are wearing all the other hats the dentist is trying to wear. And so that's the difference, right? So it's not like, if I want to grow my practice substantially, that I've got to work substantially harder. No, I have to just rethink how I'm running my practice. So 2 things come to mind on this. First of all, it doesn't mean that just because we took the practice to, quite a large size of an operation, it doesn't mean that that's what the average dentist wants or what any dentist wants. But even if the very first thing that I had to do with my $2.5 million practice was fix that. We had to make that run smoothly, because you can't scale chaos. It's, we had to get that down to, okay, what does this look like? So how do I take off some of these hats? Now, I can't afford in a $2.5 million practice to have an executive team, but I can get my team to do more than what they're doing. And that comes down to leadership systems training. right? Especially leadership, like personal growth in as a leader, if you're running any size of an operation, is absolutely first paramount. I mean, you're not going to get out of the gate if you don't get your leadership skills down, which isn't hard to do. It's just understanding where you are, what you're trying to achieve, and how to get there. And that's something that we teach. The first 2 workshops in our program, as an example, are strictly leadership focused, because if you can then take those hats off and start to give them to your team, the team can run the business to a pretty good degree. Now, as you scale, that gets better because now you can afford even more capable people. And so there's an initial push to kind of get the momentum going from where you are to just kind of get unstuck. But then it's, for thereafter, the practice is easier to run. It's way less stressful, right? Because your team is capable. Most teams are capable of doing way more than what they are doing. It's just that the dentist isn't letting go of things, doesn't have the time in most cases to teach them what they need to know, to grow them as people. And quite honestly, from my own experience, I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I didn't have a model to follow. There aren't a lot of dentists that, run a team-driven practice that are openly, sharing that knowledge of how they did it, or maybe they don't know exactly how they did it. It's just part of who they are. They just have that makeup. But there is a system to this. There is a way to do this. And that's why I mentioned, being in a room around other people who are far more successful than I was at that time shows you that it's really just up to your personal growth and your ambition. It's not like these folks have any superpower or knowledge that you don't have that's inaccessible to you, right? It's just understanding, how do I take my dental practice and apply what outside of dentistry would be considered common knowledge. But within dentistry, we spend so much time focused on teeth, on CE clinical, rather than personal growth, leadership development, and growing our teams. It makes it seem like it would be difficult. But to short answer your question, a 2x of a practice should be no more time. In fact, it might even be less operational. I would argue it's less operational time required from the dentist than the practice that you're in right now, no question.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the leadership part. I mean, when we look at the dentists that we work with that, there's practices we work with that are, let's say between 500,000 to $1 million in revenue, and there's some that are, 5, 6 or more. It's never the SEO, right? It's not like a lot of practices think, if I just sprinkle the right Facebook marketing on, my business is going to grow. It's not about that. Number one, it comes down to the leadership. Like, these people are, they come in, they've got a great attitude. People love working for them, right? So, which leads me perfectly to sort of the next question. So one of the things that, one of my mentors is this lady, her name is Cal Bratch. She runs a very successful practice in Ontario as well. She believes in a lot of the same things you're talking about, that, it's about the leadership, it's about the team. You have to empower the people to grow the practice for you. So one of the things she said that really stuck with me, and I want to kind of get your perspective on it, is she said, as a dentist, your success, the success of your whole practice, it's really at the mercy of your team. These people can either rise you up, or they can bury you very subtly, right? So you need to focus on them. And I think a lot of dentists believe that, if you're just really good at dentistry, then you can build a very good dental practice. Like, no, that's a very small part of it. So what's your perspective on it? And as a sort of second part question, how do you get the team on board? How do you empower them? Can you kind of share a bit of how you've done it, or sort of you mentioned like the people don't have a system to follow. Can you touch a little bit more upon that? What is the sort of system? Like, what are the pieces you think dentists are missing?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's so much to unpack in that one. So you mentioned marketing. Like, marketing to me is, it magnifies what you've already got. If you've got crappy systems, it's just going to magnify that. Like, you don't want to broadcast that. You don't want to add. It's like, if I have a shopping cart and I put a Ferrari engine in it, it's still a shopping cart. The wheels are going to fall off at a certain point. So you can't just throw more marketing dollars at it and fix it. Marketing to a degree fixes some slop, but it's never going to get you to second gear, right? So if you back up a little and we look at just from a leadership perspective, and there's a few other ways we can come at this, and we just taught a leadership workshop last month. When you really break it down, your people absolutely make or break. There are study after study show this, that the leader, if the leader can engage the employees will engage the patients. So there are studies that show clearly that the sentiment of the employees about the business is the same sentiment that the customers have about the business.
Oh,
So
that's
if your
interesting.
people,
I never heard that.
yeah, if your
I
people
agree with it.
aren't,
Yeah.
yeah, it makes sense logically, right? Like if your people aren't engaged, and if they're, so let me take it from the other direction. If your people are super excited about what you do, they love coming to work, they're a really cohesive team, then the patients will feel that. And it drives everything, right? Case acceptance, referrals, people paying their bills, etc. Now, how do you build that? So it backs up now to who's on the bus, who are we hiring? Again, from my own experience, I remember way back in the day doing hiring with, at the end of the day, exhausted, like I want to go home, 10 minutes, what do you got? Here's a resume, yeah, they're qualified, okay, they got a pulse, hire them, good enough, which is horrible, right? But that's what we do.
Yeah.
So now, we have this, and we built this with tripling the practice. One of the things that we figured out was you can't just double the team because then everything breaks. We have to go back and do it right. So we did it wrong, then we did it right, and the next doubling was really smooth. The first doubling was not so smooth. So, looking back, there's always, hindsight is 2020, but we built this hiring system out that is really designed to get you the best people in the shortest time. And we do this. So last year alone, we hired about 196 people for dental offices, of which I think 140 were non-dental. So they were
Oh,
hired
interesting.
for,
Yeah.
we hired them for their ability. So we have a few assessments that we run them through. These people scored at the top. They're great people. They're usually coming from food service and hospitality, and then we can teach them the rest. We can teach the dental stuff, right? The technical stuff is easy. That's 20%. It's the attitude and the drive you can't teach. So if you build a team with the right people and then you just teach them what they need to know, you're going to win, right? So if you don't have the right people, it's very hard to engage. So some people say, well, can you take the team that I have and yeah, we can make them better. But if you want the best version of your team, maybe there are some replacements that need to be made. I don't know. So again, there's a way to do that. But over time, the ultimate goal should be, maybe I don't want to turn over my team, but I want to build my team. So every time I hire, I have a new opportunity to make my team better. And with each new person, if I'm hiring and bringing a person in at the top and losing from the bottom of the team, then we're just turning over in the right trajectory. Things are going in the right way. And then from there, it's just a matter of having that intentional structure where me as a leader, I'm putting my energy into my team, and especially into my key people, who are then helping to build the energy of the rest of the team, which then translates directly into the patients. You can't shortcut that by just trying to market, because then again, you're just putting a Ferrari engine in a shopping cart, and you can have the phone can ring from morning till night. You're just going to have a bunch of missed calls and a bunch of non-conversions because your systems suck.
Yeah. So I like that a lot. Like, first of all, I love the analogy. I think it absolutely is exactly what happens with a lot of practices. They think that if I just do some marketing, everything's going to change. I'm just going to get more, more patients coming in. It's like, no, you're trying to put a more high power engine into such a shopping cart. You're not going to get anywhere. Like, maybe you're going to, get the shopping cart a little bit faster, but you're really not going to achieve the kind of results you're looking for. So generally what I see, and I've experienced myself, is when you work with marketing companies, they always try to convince you that, whatever it is that they offer is kind of what you need. If it's an SEO company, SEO is the best thing you could do. You want to grow your business, you need to do SEO. If they're a social media company, they're going to pitch you on social media. I think you and I understand that, like, it's not quite that simple. Yes, you do need to get more phone calls. You can have the best team in the world, but if the phone doesn't ring, then they're not really being utilized correctly. At the same time, the phone can ring off the hook. If you don't have the right people, it also doesn't work. Now, I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you identify who the right people are? In our business, we try to first measure the actual results of, how much are they converting? The average dental practice, if they get a new patient calling, what's the chance that they're going to, convert them? How does this practice compare to that? or maybe you have a sort of different methodology? Because the reason I ask this is one of the things that we run into all the time is dentists believe, oh, my team's already great. There's no issues internally. I just need some SEO, right? So, how do you evaluate team members? Because whenever I've asked dentists to kind of explain, like, why do you think they're great? I've never got a good answer from any of them. And in fact, I've seen a couple of situations where the person they thought was really great, it turned out a year later, she was actually stealing money from the business. So, this happens all the time. So how do you evaluate people?
Sure. So evaluating people is I mean, that's a whole section on its own. Then evaluating the metrics of the business. Maybe I'll just back up and give you more of a holistic kind of approach. The first thing that we do when we interact with the practice is we get data. So we need to know and accurate, objective data, not like, how do you think things are going? Because, well, I mean, it depends on the day then. We need to know specifically. So just to look at your example of phones, the first thing we would do is we would plug in a dashboard that would give us exactly what's happening on the phone. How many people called, how many calls were missed, when were they missed, who took them, what happened, all the way down to, did this person actually get treatment done or not? We need to know, because otherwise, again, if you can totally mess with your ROI on any marketing campaign. So let's say you send out 1,000 postcards, and just postcards as an example, or whatever, you spend money on SEO or AdWords, and you get 5 calls. If you can close at 80%, if you can convert at 80%, so first of all, you answer 85% plus of the calls, and then you convert 85% plus of those into new patients, you're doing okay. You've got 4 patients. If you're answering 50% of the calls and closing 50% of those, you got 1 or 2 patients. And at the average value of a patient, just in first year spend is about $1,500 for a practice in Canada, and lifetime value is about $5,000. Mind you, that's North America. It applies Canada and U.S. Your ROI completely changes, right? You can go from being underwater to getting a 3-to-1 just on that one piece, which is and again, arguably the most important piece is your first point of contact. But there's so much more that goes into that, right? Obviously, as you know. To back up a little further from a marketing perspective, the best marketing plan, as you said, most marketing companies are, if all they have is a hammer, then every problem is a nail, so whatever they're good at or whatever they like to do, where they make the most money at, that's what they sell you, right? So the best marketing plan is the one that you're in charge of, that you've developed with your team. And ideally that you spent some time to think about, that you've built a marketing calendar around, that you're doing things that work, and you keep doing them, which is one of the things that we teach. And it's one of the 4 pillars, right? It's not the only thing. A lot of times, as you mentioned, people come to you and say, well, I just want more new patients. Okay, yeah, sure. We do that. But if you don't fix leadership systems training, the marketing is just a piece of it. If you just do this and the rest of it sucks, you're going to need a lot more of this to make it go. So
you have to kind of they end up spending a lot of money to overcome operational issues, right? So when you try to, you gave the first example where you spend $1,000 on some sort of marketing initiative, you end up getting 4 patients out of that, right? So that's $250 per patient. But if half the phone calls are missed and, you only close 50%, then now you're at 1 patient, that's $1,000 per patient. It makes a big difference when you make small changes, right? So most dentists are unaware of what happens from who calls all the way to getting that butt in the chair. And that's really the piece that you kind of have to fix, because most marketing companies, they'll drive you a bunch of clicks or a bunch of Facebook likes or whatever sort of nonsense metric. Then, and they're saying hey, we're doing a good job. Look at these keyword stats. Last month we drove 500 clicks to your website. And the dentist, meanwhile, was looking at their schedule. It's but there's holes everywhere. So what is happening? And marketing company says, well, you got to figure that out, right? And the dentist, I don't even know where to begin, right? So I agree. You kind of have to really be in charge of that piece. You have to have oversight into, ultimately, it's your business. You have to know your numbers. You have to, and knowing that, you're going to be able to figure out who is actually telling you the truth and who's just spinning, blowing a bunch of smoke, right? And it's very important as a business owner for you to have control of that piece so that you can trust the data. You're not being fed some like a story that someone wants to give you.
So maybe I'll throw one more piece in there, Nick. Most dentists, and myself included, don't want to do all of that work because they see it and they say, I don't have time for that, which is true. You don't have time for that. But if you put the time into install a system that will give you the data, that will give you guardrails, that if the data gets out of the guardrails, then you go dig, and someone else can run that, then you're all set. That's all you need to do. You don't actually have to figure out all the little pieces. You just have to figure out, what do I need to know to make sure that this is not broken, that that's not broken, and that's not broken, so that when I put money in my marketing machine, I actually get something back. And it's just having that process in place. So I never wanted to, and we don't recommend that dentists do this, is to go in and nitpick or micromanage all the processes. No, you want to know them all, put them in place, and then let people run those and manage those and report data back to you, optimally as much automated as possible. But just so that you can see where are things running and where are the guardrails. And if something gets outside of the line, then you can go dig on that one thing. So you can keep working on dentistry and not have to focus on all these pieces, right? I think that's, that may alleviate some of the anxiety that people will get when they hear that they have to be in charge of all these things. Yeah, you have to be in charge of following the data, but not actually micromanaging the process.
Yeah, that's a good clarification, because I think what I've also seen personally with dentists is sometimes like in a dental practice, it's normal that, 1 month you might get 40 patients and the next you might get 12, and the next you might, like, this is just normal, right? Like there's ups and downs in businesses. But I think dentists, I've never heard someone talk about sort of like the guardrails. And you're absolutely right. Like there's a natural ebb and flow to a business. And once you look at that data and you see that, like, no, like if we look back 2 years, this is normal. So sometimes what ends up happening when you don't have that system is they get stressed out, and in turn they stress out their team over something that really is just variance. Like it's like no one did anything different. It's like, why did it rain today? It didn't rain yesterday. It's like, like who cares? But if you're looking at if you have those guardrails and you say, look, historically, this has been sort of how much this goes up and down, this metric. So it's actually well within the lines. It's fine. Let's go back and focus on, what we need to focus on. I think a lot of practices miss that. A number goes up or down, and like they immediately start to panic. Oh, and I look at it from like a statistical perspective. It's like there's nothing wrong. Just relax, right? So
well, it's anxiety and whack-a-mole management, right? Whatever thing pops up on my schedule today that I'm concerned about, that's the thing I'm going to go beat on today. But it doesn't mean that needs to be, do you know where this matters? So just look at new patients. Like the number that I want to see is net new patients. So how many came in, how many left? What do we got like for real this month? Where are we at? And if I'm within range in average, or I'm on trajectory for growth, then I'm happy about that. And I don't even need to know unless that number is red on my KPI sheet, right? And so if you have that system in place and that's being managed, then you just have a glance at the numbers, and that's all you need to do. You don't have to, physically go and micromanage all this stuff.
Now, you mentioned something earlier that, in the first year when you doubled, it was a lot more stressful than in the second year. Second year, it's like, okay, we got this down. We can basically push the gas pedal down as much as we want. So I'm curious, if you had to do it again, what was the main sort of things you learned in that first year that, now that it's like you could take over a practice and you wouldn't run into the same sort of pitfalls. What is the main problem that you ran into that first year?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the biggest issue was intentional leadership, spending the time to train, to teach the systems to everybody who came on, and first and foremost, formalizing and finalizing our onboarding process. Like, who do we hire and how do we get them up to speed? How do we make people feel supported right out of the gate? And what do they need to be successful? So we created, and this is what our clients use with our program. They're, first of all, how do you find the best people in their market for apposition? Now, if you're looking for a hygienist in today's market, I get it. If you get one, you hire them. And then you keep looking if it's not the right fit. But outside of that, like if you're looking for an admin person, let's say, you can find a really great admin team, no problem in any market. And we do this. We hire for people across North America all the time. If you find a great person who has the cognitive ability to do the job, which means they're going to learn it all, because dentistry is not exactly like a slow-paced environment. It's quick. It's kind of pressure pot at times. It's, if you're sitting at the front desk as an example, it might be a lull in terms of people standing there, and all of a sudden there's 7 people waiting to check out, and the phone's ringing, and right. So it can be a little crazy, but if you have a person who can handle that, so you're not training and it's like going in one ear and not falling out the other, they have the capacity to handle that. They have the resilience, and we test all these things out with some assessments. They're capable of doing the job. Now we got to set this person up for success. How do we do that? Well, we have an onboarding process. We get them up to a minimum level of understanding of what do we expect here? What's our culture like? What does the rest of the team expect of you? These are things that you don't generally talk about in an interview or in an onboarding.
I've never heard a dentist talk about this stuff, and it is so, you bring such a good point. Like, we went through the same thing. It wasn't until we started asking these questions and thinking about who do we want to hire, what does this person look like, what do they like, what qualities are we looking for, that we started to really scale. So I've never heard a dentist talk about that stuff, but it's so important.
You bring a weak mind into a stressful environment. I don't want to say, it doesn't sound right to say weak mind, but someone who's like, delicate flower into a business that can be pressure pot at times, and they're going to fail. Like, it is what it is. When the dentist is producing $1,000 an hour, you can't have an assistant who's used to working with a dentist who's doing $200 an hour, unless they have the capability. And we've got to figure that out. There's no way to figure that out. You can either do it one of 2 ways. You can either put them in there and see what they've got after 3 months, or you can test that out before they start and figure it out, and then give yourself the best chance. So with the system that we use, we rule out those who are very unlikely to succeed. Then we've just got to make sure that they have a really smooth onboarding process. So we have a very clear, here's what you need to know. Here's all the boxes we need to check. So it's not training by osmosis where you put them in there and they try to watch other people do their job and they absorb some of it, but not all of it. Maybe they don't see this procedure for 6 months. No, I want them to learn it now. And I want them to learn it in a way where they can actually, go back and refer to this again. So we built an entire video training system. And now our clients use this process as well, so that it's super easy to bring in someone new in the clinical area. They don't have to spend 6 months to get to be any good. They can learn it within about a week and be very capable. And then it's systemizing things down so that, I give this example often, is there was a time when I was practicing that only one assistant was capable of setting up complex procedures because she was the only one who can get it right. Now we have a system that we've used for the last many, many years, and all of our clients use this system that is literally paint by numbers, color coded. You can't miss. The next person who walks down your sidewalk can set up any procedure in the office, as long as they are not colorblind. They can literally, it's literally like, you can't miss. Every procedure has a color. You can't mess it up. And if you make it simple like that, so you take out a lot of the stress and thinking that people have to do, and you spend that time and energy with them, building up the culture and the team energy. Like I said, leader influences the team energy. The energy of the team influences the patients. And then everything just happens much smoother. So if I were to go back and look at what did we do wrong, we did that part wrong. We just put people in a situation and we needed them to swim before we taught them how to swim. And the second time around, we did the exact opposite of that. And that is what totally changed the game for us. And it's the system that now we're using reproducibly with our clients.
I definitely relate to that because we've noticed this even with listening to calls. Like, we listen to probably 40,000 calls a month, right, through our system. So the main thing I immediately noticed was there is no process in terms of how to talk to patients. And I imagine there probably isn't a process for anything internal either, right? So depending on which receptionist answers the phone, they all have a very different way of doing things, right? That don't correlate. And even with the same person, depending on how they got up that morning, One day if a patient asks us a certain question, they'll say one thing, and the next day we hear them saying something completely different. And my thinking was like, this, I'm sure, isn't isolated just to the phone. I'm pretty sure this is exactly what happens like down the line as well, from how do we greet the patient, how do you set up the room, how do you present treatment, how do you check them out. It's all, there's so much variance, so many ups and downs there. And I think that what causes a lot of instability with the performance of the business is that there is no real consistency. There is no desk file. When people often get sort of thrown into the situation, here's the desk, here's your chair, here's your computer, go, right? And dentists hire people because, oh, this person knows AbleDent, or they know Open Dental, or whatever software they're using. I'm busy, just go, right? And as you mentioned, I mean, if it's a hygienist, if it's an assistant, it's hard to find them these days, right? So, but not for front desk staff. I mean, hypothetically, you could take somebody that worked in a restaurant, and you can teach them how to do the job, right? If you have the right system there. And it really isn't all that complicated. It's not a 2-year program to teach somebody to talk to patients who are looking to book an appointment. But it's that sort of, I think it's something that dentists don't quite understand because they haven't worked in, much larger businesses where they see that, like, you can't have everyone doing it different ways, where one person says one thing, one person says that. Like, there's a common set of questions and situations that will come up in this business daily or weekly. We need to systemize how we deal with them so that no matter who you get, whether it's Jenny or Joanne, we're all doing it the same way. And many dentists, I think, when they see that, they don't realize how powerful that can be. They just think, yeah, that sounds good, but what about the SEO? It's like, no, you don't understand. That piece of it can double your business, just that small piece.
Yeah, the inconsistency will kill any business. As you said, that if one person is doing things one way, it's an indication that the whole business is not systemized. So it's like if you go into a restaurant and the bathroom is filthy, well, what does the kitchen look like, right? That's the first thing you think of. Like, if this is their standard, right? So, use a restaurant example. Like, if you have a restaurant you like to go to, I had a restaurant I love to go to here locally, and it's since closed. But when we were going there, it was like, if the owner's there, the food is excellent, like best in town. If the owner's not there, then it's hit or miss. So do I refer my friends from out of town to the restaurant? Well, I don't know. It depends who they get, right? So it's the same kind of thing. It's like, if this person answers the phone, everything's great. If this person does, then all bets are off. Well, you can't have that. If you look at Ritz-Carlton as an example, first year employee at any level, doesn't matter what their job is, even if they are just literally like, turning rooms over, 200 hours of training is put into that person. Okay, so there's one way to do everything, and that's it. There's not 5 different ways. There's not the way you feel like, whether you had your coffee or not. This is the way we do this. But you're right, people don't know that. They don't see that because we go through dental school. You start your business, and then, well, it's my way because it's my business. Well, that's great, but if you want to actually get the result, like, it doesn't take months to train someone on the phone. It takes 2 days. 2 days to teach them how to run the phone process properly to get to an appointment 90% of the times. And not at all costs, but to go through a proper process, get some good information from the patient, build rapport, and get an appointment where there's an appointment to be got. Very systematic, very simple. And what you'll find, and you probably found this on your calls, is that the longer the call takes, the less likely they are to book an appointment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If they're in 8-9 minutes with this person, they're just now unselling them
Yeah, they go in circles because they try to explain so much, almost like, let me show you how smart I am. I'm gonna, they try to diagnose treatment over the phone, and then by the end of that call, that patient is more confused than when they first called, and they don't book, right?
That's right. Yeah. You're answering questions they didn't ask. And so then, to go back to training, like, yeah, if you hire someone because they know your dental software, that's great. But if they're not a fit and they don't have the cognitive ability and the personality to do that job, don't hire them. Like, we have been through in the office alone, I know twice we flipped our entire front desk. Everybody gone. And this is, way back, but it's not hard to fix. Like, if you have a process where you can train people, so if you spent that little bit of time to build a process to train the next person. So if I have a really great team member doing something, we do this in elite practice too, who is the best person at this that we've had, that person's primary role is not to keep doing what they're doing, is to create a process to train the next one of them.
Yeah, we do the exact same thing. And
right.
it's such a key to why we were able to scale. It's exactly it. It's like, because the person, if they're really good, they're going to want progression. They're not going to want to sit and be a cog in a machine, right? So it's more interesting to them to say, I for example, in our account manager, so I had spent quite a bit of time training this person, but then she was able to train the next person in about a fifth of the time. And then, and then it just goes down and it becomes easier because each time they leave behind a system, a desk file, a process, a set of sort of instructions of like, here's how you're going to do a better job than I have done. And then the next person does that. But that's really missing in dentistry. One, nothing is written down. Part of it, I mean, there is a lot of distractions. There is a lot of chaos, but yeah, if they find a really good person, there's no longevity in terms of if that person leaves, they've lost everything. There's nothing left behind. There's no process left behind it. They weren't even thinking about anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the hardest thing to deal with is, when you talk to someone and they say, well, my key person just quit. Well, you've got 6 months of hard work ahead of you now, right? It's got to be built from somewhere. And if you're the only one left standing who knows it, that sucks. But it's on you now because the process is gone. So either you hire someone who can get there quickly and their first job is to train someone else, and not necessarily to train someone else, but to create a process. So I mentioned video training. Like it's one of the key things that we do with every client. I beat them up to do it because maybe it'll take them 6 months to do it, but there's a series of categories you need to cover. It's not hard. But if I'm a new admin person, as an example, who shows up tomorrow, I need to know, how do I open the software? How do I book a new patient? How do I take a payment? How do I submit a claim? The basics, right? And you can do that with Zoom, with screen share software, with anything in no time. If I have to get the trainer from the software company on the phone a couple of hours to teach the details, great, do that. Then shoot a lesson on how to do exactly what you just learned for the next person. Save all this stuff on your server and now you're set. Like, I mean, the next turnover is now you've shortened the learning curve by weeks and weeks, right? But we don't do that. Again, look at the other businesses. Like Disney has a university, okay? I mean, I understand Disney is huge, but they have a university for a reason. Ritz-Carlton has the same thing. They have an entire education process, okay? There is a way to do this even on a small scale. Right, so we provide a significant piece of that standardized for clients, and then we encourage them to make their own custom version after. And it's not hard to do. We show them exactly how to do it, and many have done it. And I'll tell you, it saves their necks when people, because stuff happens. Like people, especially with what we're calling the Great Resignation with COVID, right? Like great people are now just, what? Hey, I'm just shutting it down. I'm retiring. I'm going to spend time with my family. We've decided to move across the country. It's like all kinds of things are happening, and it's not they're necessarily quitting for any reason. It's just that there are life changes that happen, and we for some reason think that just because it worked last year, it's going to keep working for the next 10 years, right? Where you have anything built on anything but a sure footing, you're at risk. Like it's a one-legged table, right? It's like you're just waiting for anything to come and just push you over, and then what have you got? Right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
You got to shore up those positions.
I mean, I agree with you. The recording it is such a key part of it because, like, often as a business owner, people will come to you asking, "Oh, how do I do this? How do I do this?" And I basically trained myself years ago. I'm not just going to answer it. We're going to do this on video so that the next time it comes up, I'm just going to link you the videos. I don't have to do this 50 times, right? So we first did it when clients would have questions about, how do I use Gmail exactly? Where do I set up a signature? And I got tired of just answering the same question. So I shot 11 videos and I've never had to answer any questions about that in like 5 years. And then what happens is you can give it to your team, and If anything changes, have them record the next one, right? So it's their job to maintain it, and because it's one thing to, you don't want to end up with, like the binder, where it's like, here's a million processes that like no one's looked at since 1980s, and that doesn't work. You need to put a couple simple systems that definitely will be utilized frequently, and then empower the team to modernize them, change them, or give them some sort of like ability to, like a sandbox that they can play in, where you can change these things, make them better, but that way you can sort of empower your team to like improve the business, but still have sort of constraints where you can't just like change whatever you want, right? And I think doing that through video, like compartmentalizing certain processes, recording it, you won't have to do those meetings again and again where you're training person, here's how you do the billing, right, for the 8th time, because you've lost a bunch of people that, yeah, I completely agree with you.
I tell this story frequently at workshops when we're talking about the team-driven practice material. And there was a time when this clicked for me, when I counted in a morning while I'm treating patients, how many times I was interrupted and asked a question that I've answered before, 13 times in the morning. Well, I have answered this question before. And then it clicked, like, duh, like, this is silly. Why am I doing this, right? Is there not a better way? So then you have, this is where you start looking at what other businesses are doing. What we're talking about, this is not like in any other business, this is exactly what they would do as standard practice. And in a dental practice, it's just, this stuff wasn't taught to us. It's not, common knowledge in business is not necessarily common knowledge in every business. And it's so simple, and so much stomach lining is saved if you have these processes in place, that if my superstar employee quits, it doesn't matter. It sucks for a few days, but someone else can step up really quickly. And you mentioned something I want to touch on, that people can then achieve. They can move up the ladder in your organization. People have this understanding, or this maybe misconception, that if I teach someone else what I know, then they're going to take my job. So that's a ridiculous scarcity mentality, that if you're as a leader, you're coaching people and you're building them up, and they understand that as I develop, I can do more. I can take on a different level of a different role. I can advance in the organization. If they have a next, then they're far more likely to want to do that. So you have to let people see the future, take people along in your vision for the practice. Where do you want things to go? And it gives them an additional incentive or an additional drive to want to succeed within your business, right?
Yeah, like I tell my people the same thing. It's that if you can make yourself replaceable, you now become the most valuable employee here, because I can then move you into a different department and you can systemize that piece of it. So that scarcity mentality of, well, I need to be the one that holds all the secrets so that I don't get replaced. It's like, you don't understand, you'll actually be a less valuable employee to me, because if you cannot systemize, if you cannot take that job and simplify it so somebody that's junior to you can do it, then in my opinion, you're not very good at business, right? The opposite, if you can do that type of work, you now become infinitely more valuable to the company, and it's more interesting. You can jump to like different positions, and you can definitely grow your career from there.
Exactly. And it's incumbent on the business owner to teach their team members that concept, because again, that's not how we're wired.
So one thing I want to sort of dive into a little bit is, what is your sort of process for, there's patients who are going to call and it's very simple. I just moved here looking for a new dentist. I saw you guys have good reviews. Can I book with you? But there's also patients who come in and they have a completely bombed out mouth, right? Like, it's not a simple impulse decision. There's a lot to think about. So that sort of, let's say, sales cycle takes a lot longer. Now, in every other kind of business, which you touched upon, it's like a lot of these systems, like everyone has them already. In dentistry, they, for whatever reason, is going to be lacking. One thing you and I have chatted about is CRM systems, right? Like, I have never seen a successful multi-million-dollar business, operate without one. There's just so many steps that have to happen before a person decides to do business with you, that you have to kind of keep track of and see, where do people fall off. Whenever I talk about CRM systems, most dentists are like, what's that, right? And I try to explain it, and they said, oh, no, we have able dent though. It's like, that doesn't, that just shows you what has happened, not, it doesn't predict what is, it doesn't track lead metrics, it tracks lag metrics, the system of record. It's not the same thing. And they can't grasp, like, I don't get it. It's too, I don't know what you mean with this thing. You know, we're not a real estate agency. We're not like a sales company. I don't think we need this sort of stuff. So I believe, you know, you're big on, like, you need to have a system to manage your leads. Maybe you can explain, you know, to dentists who will be watching, what is a CRM system? Why is it important to have something like this in your business so that, you know, you can actually drive more patients? Maybe you can explain in a way that dentists will actually understand, because I've really struggled to get this point across to them.
Sure, that's a good question. So your dental software is nothing more than a records management. It's think of it like a paper file on a cabinet, like the good old days. What you don't have is a list of who is interested in what we do but isn't ready to buy today. So if you had a room of 1,000 people and you said, who is looking to buy a car today? You might have one hand go up, probably none. But who's looking to buy a car in the next 30 days? You'll have more hands go up. How about the next 90 days? More hands will go up. How about the next 2 years? Probably a lot of hands will go up. And the same thing is true. You mentioned the concept of a sales cycle. This is the concept of a sales cycle. So if I have I've been thinking about straightening my teeth, but I'm not really ready to do it today. The kids are in school for another year. I'm still paying for that, but I'm thinking about it. Well, do I now just forget about it because my dental software doesn't have a place for me to do anything with that? Like, they're in hygiene, we talked about it, they're kind of interested, they want to know more, but then it dies. And how do you remember that? So there's, you know, dentists think about unscheduled treatment, like we planned it, the person wanted it, but then they didn't book it for some reason. What about the person is interested, but they don't want to book it, they're not ready to commit? What happens to them? What about people who click on a landing page and they want to download information about dental implants, but they're not ready to get one today? Maybe in a year's time, they get an inheritance and now they're ready. Well, what happens if you know that that person is interested and you follow up with them with some frequency, even if it's just a few emails? When that person is ready, they're going to call you, not a year from now. Well, it's time for me to get this implant. Let's see who does implants. Let's look and see who's, you know, we'll search online and see about implants. You want them to think, okay, this is the person that talked to me about it first, and they're the one that keeps sending me good information about it. There has to be this process. So I'll give you a couple of examples of how we use this really well. And even an elite practice version, I'm sure you have many on your own. We had about 20,000 contacts in our CRM in a dental practice, of which about 12,000 were active patients, which I know sounds like a lot, and in a small town it is a lot, but we did a lot. So we never had an event. We never had any kind of marketing promotion where we didn't capture leads, which means email address, optimally mailing address. And then we would put them on our regular nurture campaign, which means a weekly email or a monthly mailing, like our newsletter. We just put them on our newsletter campaign, and they would just get our newsletter in the mail. And then they would start to develop a bit of a relationship with us before they ever did business with us. And then when the need came, well, who would they call? The people that had been following up with them, that have been treating them like family, that have been giving them good information for months and months, or just some random office in the, you know, on Google, on a Google search, or Yellow Pages still exists up here. You know, do we just find a random office and we go there? So you're tipping the scale substantially in your favor for general patients, for patients of a specific procedure, which you can segregate. And this isn't difficult to do. By the way, we build this for every office that we work with. So they all get a CRM, they all get landing pages, they all get funnels that go with it, and they all get a simple form where they can add patients on the fly to different campaigns. And again, it's just like, if I want to do more Invisalign and I have a bunch of people who I know in my practice we've talked to about Invisalign, and I'm going to have an Invisalign day, well, gee, who should I invite, right? If I can pull up a list of people who are already interested, my close rate is going to be substantially better to have people attend that day and actually get the treatment done versus just randomly blasting from scratch. So there's a difference between a warm list and a just randomly cold list. Like if you go to just, the masses on the internet, it might cost you $250 to get a patient in the door. But if I have a list of people who I've already gotten interested in something and they've somehow, agreed to give us their information to get some information, or, in attending an event or something, those people, to get them in the door is substantially less. And they already are starting to build the know, like, and trust with you before they ever set foot in the office. So letting that go means that every time you talk to a patient, or a potential patient rather, you're starting from zero, versus picking up the conversation where you left off. That is how I would explain a CRM process to someone who doesn't have it. And I would highly recommend, thinking about that process. Now, it can be extremely expensive to set up, and it can be done extremely simply, or it can be like we include it with our program, because it really isn't that complicated, and a dental office doesn't need a massively complex system that then needs a lot of training to implement. It just needs to be effective and get the job done.
Yeah, it's a lot like, I mean, you're essentially planting the seed, and you need to make sure you're constantly watering it. Because like a lot of practices, a lot of front office staff, a lot of dentists believe, somebody called about Invisalign, oh, but they didn't book, must have not been a good patient. It's like, people have a lot of stuff going on in their life. And it's funny because on the flip side, like we have dentists that reach out to us and, they'll sign up a year later, and we keep in touch with them. We send them great content. Here's how you could do some things for free. We'll teach you stuff. And of course, like you said, like when it comes time to, hey, I need to do something. I'm ready to kind of like take the next step. Of course, they're going to call you because you're the only company that's been trying to give them value all this time. They're not just going to go to Google and find a completely random company to work with, right? They're most likely going to give you the first shot and call you, and you have a much higher chance to secure that patient. So I absolutely agree.
So I would add to that, if your sales cycle for Invisalign, let's say on a postcard campaign, is like 6 months, then you can do it like, and you wouldn't know that, by the way, if you weren't capturing the data, right? You just wouldn't know. You would just say, well, I sent out postcards, we got 3 calls, but nobody booked. Well, is your person on the phone doing a good job, first of all? And second, are they following a process? Like our process is really clear. Get some lead capture. Like we need to know who is this person, get an email address. How do you get an email address? Well, can I have your email address? No, nobody wants to give it to you. But hey, the doctor would ask me, every person who calls about Invisalign, to send them his free report on Invisalign and cosmetic dentistry in general. I can send that to your email address right now. Can I get that from you? Done. Then they go in the campaign and they start getting emails. Well, the first thing they get is the free report, but then they start getting the follow-up emails for it, right? And they stay in your nurture campaign, right? It's really simple to do this digitally with the CRM, but if you don't ask, then you don't have the data. So I know from our practice that the data was like sales cycle on implant could be 9 months. On ortho, it could be 6 months to 2 years, depending on when they enter that the funnel. For lead practice, like it could be 3 years. We've had people that jumped on, they downloaded something or they requested a book or something 3 years ago, and then they became a client.
Yeah, we see it all the time too.
If you don't track that, then it's like, well, we're all these, a lot of people were interested, but nothing ever happened. Well, again, this is not rocket science. This is also not new. This is standard business practice in the rest of the world, right?
So that's a really interesting point there. So, my question here is, regarding DSOs, because I think, what's interesting with the market now is in the U.S., maybe 10 years ago, like 10% of practices were corporate practices, right? Today, it's like 50%. Okay. In Canada, 10 years ago, it was maybe 1%. Now it's about 10%. Part of it is we have a lot of more stricter rules that the RCDSO kind of puts into create sort of a barrier, right? So that, dentists own these practices, but it's happening here too. And, as you said, like a lot of these things we're talking about are standard practice in any kind of business, except dentistry. So now you have the, kind of this wave of corporate dentistry starting to kind of encroach upon in a lot of areas. My question to you is like, should a general dentist be worried about this? How do you think dentistry is going to change in the next, a decade or so? My opinion is that, there's always going to be a need. People would much more likely to do business with a well-run, family-owned sort of practice assuming they're really doing a good job, the customer service is good, the dental care is good. There's always going to be a need for that. But for the average dentist that doesn't think about customer service, doesn't try to create a great patient experience, a corporate dental practice is going to seem more attractive because they are thinking about these things. They definitely put focus on customer service. So what's your thoughts on that? Do you think like an independently owned dental practice, it has a bright future, provided it does certain things, or like what's your take on the sort of expansion of corporate dentistry and DSOs? Is it something that people should be worried about?
It's a good question. So the competitive advantage of a non-DSO practice is the same as it's always been. It's if you have a top shelf experience, again, leadership, systems, training, marketing, right? If you are intentional about building a solid team of people who care about the patients, and the patients know that, like people will go where they have trust and rapport with the team. In a DSO or other organizational structure, dental office, in a corporate office, you're going to have less of a personal experience. It's not going to be terrible because some of them are doing a good job. But there will be more turnover. There'll be a little less of a personal touch. There'll be a little less of a direct relationship, in terms of what you could build as a really intentional solo practice. Now, the average practice, even the average practice who thinks they're good, but they really don't know the difference and don't have any data to prove it, and they don't have any objective assessment or otherwise, they're wide open for getting beat up in this transfer, right? In this transition. It's going to happen. Like the corporates are not dying by any stretch of the imagination. They have deep pockets, they have unlimited resources to handle pretty well whatever comes at them. And the average practice is what's getting beaten up right now. The better practices, the ones that are doing the kind of things that we're talking about, they're not suffering. They're having their best months ever, right? So majority of our client base is, it's not even a factor for them. They're just killing it. They're having, they're having the best time they have ever had with their teams. The team is, again, if the dentist gets the team engaged and the team engages the customer, everything changes. It's like any other business. Ritz-Carlton isn't worried about the other hotels that are trying to nip at its heels. Disney is not worried about anybody else in any of the businesses that they're in. Apple's not worried about any other business, right? So it's just, can you do a better job than anybody else? But it has to start with, internally, do your people know why they're there? Do they care? Do they actually care about people? Are you doing what's in the best interest of the patients, the practice, and the team, not just the team, just me? Right? Do you care? What do you do for your community? How involved are you? Like, how do people perceive you in the community? That's all marketing, right? It's not just spraying marketing out. It's what goodwill do we do in the community? How do people see us, right? And so if you take the time to build that broad base of positioning in your community, if you're the key leader in terms of giving great content to your people, if you have to your community, if you do many things for the community, if you are positioned in a way that is very difficult to shake, then corporate's not going to even be a factor for you. But if you're just average and you're doing the same things you were doing 10 years ago today, then I'd be careful.
Yeah, I can speak from the perspective of sort of a patient, because I've been as I moved around, I've traveled a lot. I've worked remotely in different places. I've been to a lot of different practices, and one thing I hear from a lot of dentists is that, we treat our patients better, we have better experience. And my thinking was like, do you though? Because I've actually been in corporate dental practices and their customer service was absolutely amazing. In fact, even when I left them, like they, said, oh, you're moving. Well, we have another practice in that area. We'd be happy to help you. Like even the way they ended the relationship was very nice and friendly. Like I felt bad to leave them. So I think in a privately owned dental practice, you definitely have the capacity to create an experience that I think corporate dentistry can't necessarily create because they have logistical issues and scale. But it doesn't mean that just because you're in, a small independently owned practice, that comes by default. If you don't work at it, it doesn't mean naturally, oh, we have better experience. Not necessarily, not unless this is intentional, that you're really focusing on this. And in a lot of cases, what I see with practice is that they kind of check off in their mind, like, well, we're small, so we treat patients better. No, you don't, though. That's the problem. So I think the logistics of running a practice that you fully own, it does enable you to create an experience that I think a DSO would have a hard time doing, because you have multiple dentists coming in, going. It's hard to have that personal connection with them. I mean, it's a large scale operation. But I think my message to dentists would be like, don't think that if you're not actively focusing on these things, that it just happens by itself. It absolutely does not.
Yeah, great customer service is not a differentiator anymore. It is a seat. It gets you a seat at the table. Like, okay, you're at least in the running now, but you can't assume that just because it's a corporate office that you're doing a better job, because they have systems, they have processes, they have economies of scale to even fix some of the lack of those areas, but they're not doing a bad job of it, right? It's just an assumption that you make, but it's not true. Again, look at big companies out there. Some of the best service examples are huge companies. So you can't say that out of the gate, but you do have an advantage that they don't, which is to get into the community, which is to get, build a base that they can't, because they won't have the energy or desire to do it because they're doing well enough. The unshakable base that we built in our practice, as an example, was because we did more for the community than anybody else. We made it an intentional part of our culture to do that. And we worked really hard on the culture. Like, for us, team culture and building a cohesive team was just as important as doing quality dentistry. And it has to be, because if you want your team to love your patients, the only way they're going to do that is if there's actually like some significant attention about that. The patient will feel that the employee loves working there. And that will make a patient experience that is different. The processes, the things that you do, anyone can copy that, but they can't copy that trust, rapport, or that sense that this person actually does care about me. They can't copy that. So the hardest thing for anybody to copy in your practice is your engaged team. If you don't have that, though, then you're on par with everybody else, because again, a great experience is standard today. It's expected.
No, I completely agree with that. I think the way listening to phone calls, where we see is what it manifests into is you'll definitely sense that the person doesn't like being there, and the patient isn't going to separate that. Maybe there's a really good dentist here, maybe this person's just having a bad day. If they have a bad experience, or like something rubs them the wrong way, they're talking to somebody that makes them feel like, I'm busy, I'm stressed out, what do you want? Are you going to come in or not? They're going to assume that it's not that person that is, terrible. They're going to think your whole practice is terrible. They're going to think you're terrible as a dentist. Like, people kind of like, they don't separate those things. They have those feelings towards your entire business. So I completely agree with that. So where I'd like to end it off is how can people get in touch with you? So you mentioned you're teaching courses. You've got a lot of great systems and processes. Like, what I like about Elite Practice is that it's not just consulting where, like, let us talk at you for like a weekend, and you write as many notes as you can and take your binder, go home and figure out the rest of the stuff. So how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way if they want to learn more about what you do? How can they, where can they go?
Yeah, the best place to check us out would be going to our website, which is theelitepractice.com. And just go ahead and request a free copy of my book, The Elite Practice Formula. You can see that right on the homepage. And we'll give you a whole bunch of free stuff. We'll give you, obviously, the book will be printed. It's a printed copy. We'll mail it out to you. And you'll also get a bunch of free bonuses with that, including some of our Weekend Wisdom series that you can sample kind of what we're all about.
So I've actually read the book from cover to cover, and I actually thought it was quite interesting. It's not I didn't feel it was just like one gigantic sales pitch. It was actually filled with a lot of really good information, and it gives you, I think, a good overview of all the stuff that is required and how you sort of need to blend it together to get results. And as I touched upon earlier, every company's trying to sell you on, oh, we do social media, you need social media. I think what I liked about your approach is that you give a good overview of like, here's all the mechanisms that are required to build a good practice, and here's how they kind of need to come together, and here's the systems you need, but also here's the elements of people and motivation and culture that once you build, it's very difficult for people to try to take that from you or compete with you on that. That's where the magic really kind of happens. So highly recommend the book. I thought it was actually a very good read. It wasn't just a gigantic sales pitch. It was very informative.
Excellent. That's great. I appreciate it.